3D printing technology comes to Central Library in the form of a special exhibit that continues through October 31st. The Wild Times exhibit features rocks created from digital files of rocks that were encountered by Susan Robb on her recent journey along the Pacific Crest Trail. These rocks were created by 3D Parts Manufacturing of Indianapolis, and we have the Director of Education from 3D Parts, Carolee Tremain, with us to give us a bit of a demonstration. Thanks for joining us, Carolee. Before we show people how this technology works, what about its popularity and demand for 3D printing today?
Well, 3D printing is actually not a new technology. It actually began in the late 80s, early 90s. But just in the past few years, it's become available to just about everybody. Now we have so many different models that it is economically feasible, and it's expected to be on every desktop, just as computers are.
Now, to what extent does function follow form? In other words, items that are produced by a 3D printer may look like their original pieces, but to what extent do they actually achieve their functionality?
Well, actually, that's one of the advantages of 3D printing. As you can see here, if you can imagine it, you can design it. 3D printing starts with a 3D file, and you can either create the file yourself or you can download files from the internet.
Okay.
And depending on the way you model your file, you can create files that require no assembly, they move, and are printed in one part.
No assembly required.
No assembly required. And that is nice in a lot of different applications because, of course, it's more functional. And you have less chance for it to break or malfunction if you do not have a lot of parts that have to be assembled.
Right. Well, here's the 3D printer that we have on display today that Brian and Carlos have put together and created some pieces already for us to look at. What is being printed now?
These are actually rocks from the Wild Times exhibit.
Okay.
Files that were sent to us by the artist,
Susan
Robb, part of her team. And what they did is as they go through their tour, they scan the rocks, and we were able to they emailed us the files from their journey, and we were able to print these rocks. And this is nice because it allows us to tie nature into...
Well, and that's the whole purpose of the exhibit, to kind of connect nature with reality.
Exactly.
And what people experience in their daily lives.
Exactly.
How long would it take for these rocks to actually be finally produced?
Well, that is one side of 3D printing. It's slow. These rocks for this plate will probably take about an hour.
Well, they look like they're well on their way, but not only has this machine produced some rocks, you have some musical instruments, so to speak, here that we can show people.
Yes.
A frog. Tell us about some of these things.
Yes, the 3D printing, as it is now, it will impact every industry, because if you can imagine it, you can create it, basically.
I like that phrase.
So, thank you. And that is the trick that grabs the interest of kids as well. And that's been good to inspire and increase interest in STEM and art, and tying art and math together. But for example, I know at the Learning Curve in October, this October 11th, I believe it is, it will be a musical topic, and this is a panpipe that was printed, and it is completely functional. We have there was one teacher I know that used 3D printing. He was a band instructor that used 3D printing to print reeds for his students, and they could do it much on demand, customizable, and very functional.
A couple of questions before we talk about some of the events taking place in October. Is there an ethical issue involved in the industry? You know, a lot of people are concerned about, well, what if guns have been produced from 3D printers? How is the industry responding to that challenge?
Yes. When I began with 3D Parts, and everybody I talk to, that's the first thing that comes up. You can print guns. I will tell you, it's not as easy as it looks on the internet. If you were to print a gun on a 3D printer that is economically feasible for most, the person trying to fire the gun would be the one that would be hurt. It's not as easy as what people would think. But there are a lot of implications, just as with all technology, and it has evolved so fast, intellectual property.
Right.
The great thing is there's a lot of open source software out there that is free for everyone to use to design. There are models, for example, the frog is a model it's a frog dissection kit that can be downloaded on the internet. And it's a great way for kids to learn the anatomy of a frog without actually dissecting
dissect
the
messiness
frog.
involved.
Exactly. So, but as far as intellectual property, that is being researched right now.
Okay. One positive implication maybe for the future that I've heard about, you say it's happening already, the production of food, real food.
Absolutely. And they've, one that I'm familiar with that is very popular right now, it's a printer similar to this, but instead of the ABS plastic, which is similar to Legos, it would be any type of food material that can be heated up and melted and molded. They're making custom chocolates.
Yes.
Cake decorations. For your cake, you could design anything you want and have it printed.
And I'm guessing that will only become more sophisticated as time goes on and maybe help with food shortages down the road.
Exactly, and actually they do have for more sophisticated printers, and I would say they're in the R&D stage still, where they can print more nourishing foods using protein and for whether it be for the military, space, underdeveloped countries, to be able to print a steak.
So technology giving us hope for the future, perhaps.
Exactly.
Carolee Tremain with 3D Parts Manufacturing, thank you for this discussion.
Thank you.
We do want to mention the special programs, one of which Carolee referred to in October. October 8th, there is what's called the Sculptress Workshop beginning at 4 p.m. here at Central Library. This is a 3D design software workshop for artists and educators. And then at 6 p.m. that same day on October 8th, artist Lauren Kusrow will discuss her work and the intersection of nature and art that we talked about earlier. On October 11th, a youth activity at 1 p.m. called 123D Sculpt iPad activity, where children can experiment with digital sculpting. And then finally on October 11th at 2 p.m., an Earth Tones concert featuring family-friendly music of songs from around the world that reflect our engagement with nature. The registration information is on the screen. Call 275-4222. That's the learning curve here at Central Library to learn more about any of these free programs. Again, thanks to Carolee and 3D Parts Manufacturing. The exhibit, Wild Times, continues through October 31st here at Central Library.